This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korea's president in talks with his Polish counterpart Andrzej Duda with security high on the agenda. Yoon Suk-yeol says Seoul will not remain idle over the deployment of North Korean soldiers to Russia. Vladimir Putin to meet UN head António Guterres for the first time in more than 2 years on the final day of the BRICS summit. The meeting, condemned by Kyiv as damaging to the UN's reputation, will likely address Russia's aggression in Ukraine. Philippine rescuers race to reach residents stranded by fast-rising floodwaters after torrential rain from Tropical Storm Trami submerged villages, killing at least 26 people. A strong investor demand for two of Hong Kong's largest offerings this year, raising hopes that a turning point has been reached in the city's IPO drought. And also on East Asia Tonight, a look at how Chinese car makers are powering up Indonesia's dream of becoming a dominant force in the global EV market. The presidents of South Korea and Poland say North Korea's troop dispatch to Russia to fight Ukraine is a provocation and a global security threat. Yoon Suk-yeol and his Polish counterpart Andrzej Duda held talks in Seoul today, as Pyongyang reportedly sent 3,000 troops to Moscow. The two leaders promised their backing for a new contract to export South Korean K2 tanks to Poland by the end of the year. South Korea is one of the world's top 10 weapons exporters, and the two countries signed their biggest arms contract in 2022. With that deal, Seoul agreed to send more than $44 billion worth of military equipment, including K2 tanks and Chunmoo rocket systems. Mr. Yoon also said the two countries will set up a defense dialogue to cooperate on security matters. Seoul is boosting defense cooperation with its allies. On Monday, it kicked off a large-scale joint air drill with the U.S., dubbed Freedom Flag. The 12-day exercise also includes the Australian Air Force. A North Korean balloon filled with rubbish has landed on Seoul's presidential compound for the second time. The president's security officer says the balloon exploded in the air this morning, scattering its contents all over the compound. Local media say the balloon contained propaganda leaflets making fun of President Yoon Suk-yeol and his wife. This is the second time a trash balloon has landed in downtown Seoul, even though it is protected by soldiers as a no-fly zone. The North has been sending these balloons over the border for months. Pyongyang says it is retaliation for South Korean activists sending anti-North Korean materials their way. With provocations from North Korea piling up, South Korea has also been demonstrating its willingness to flex its military muscle, specifically by bolstering defense ties and signing arms deals with major allies. For more on how inter-Korean tensions are adding to security threats both in the region and the world, we have a research fellow from South Korea's Asan Institute of Policy Studies. That's Dr. Yang Uk. He joins us live. Now, Dr. Yang, alignment between Seoul, South Korea, and Poland coming at the time as it is right now. This alignment, perfect for the moment, would you say?
Yes, I mean, the need for both countries to cooperate is crucial. And I mean, the security challenge faced by both Poland and South Korea is kind of same. We are both the front line of the democratic country against these authoritative regimes.
When you talk about democratic countries, so if we look at alignment between South Korea and Poland, both are front lines in their particular regions for both actual and potential conflict. Both are allies, whether it's directly in South Korea's case or indirectly via NATO and EU in Poland's case. So the threats they face and the support that they do get plus South Korea's innate strengths in its defense industry, these are making these two countries perfect partners for the moment? That was the question.
Yes. The thing is that Poland need a very immediate need for their defense buildup, while the European defense companies and even the U.S. manufacturer cannot provide the weapon in time. But in case of South Korea, I mean, we have constant threat from North Korea and capability to provide those weapons. So I mean, that's where the cooperation started.
All right, so this constant threat you mentioned, now that threat has certainly gone up a notch in the last few hours with news of the Russian lower house of parliament ratifying essentially what at that point was unclear, at this point still unclear, what might amount to a mutual defense pact between Russia and North Korea. Now we've got news increasingly confirmed about North Korean troops, 3,000 of them being deployed to Russia to fight that war in Ukraine. If this should be confirmed, significant deployment in Ukraine, how does that change South Korea's calculus in terms of helping what's happening in Ukraine?
Well, South Korea could provide the lethal weapons to Ukraine, and the Poland will be the front line for those efforts because the Poland is the logistic hub for the support of the war in Ukraine. Thinking of the existing cooperation between the Poland and South Korea, I mean, it's perfect place to start.
All right, so Poland as the perfect conduit or perhaps even launching base for South Korea's increasing involvement in helping Ukraine defend itself against Russian invasion. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, of course. I mean, South Korea could provide weapons to Ukraine through the Poland existing, infrastructures, and also, I mean, the NATO country would need South Korean intelligence support, and maybe I mean, we can do it from the Poland area.
I suppose the concerns right now, in terms of, I think both Yoon Suk-yeol as well as the Polish president, in the last few hours as well, together saying what's happening in terms of Russia and North Korea drawing closer together, that would pose a security threat that goes beyond even Europe, even the Indo-Pacific. How do you see this axis taking place, drawing together different partners? How does that threaten what both leaders are saying, global security?
Yeah, it's really, rather unique situation that Poland have to, deal with the Russia and also, possibly North Korea. And in case of South Korea, I mean, we have a constant threat from the North Korea, but I mean, we're going to have to, cooperate each other because I mean, we have some kind of know-how how to deal with this, North Korean and such authoritative regime. So I mean, this defense cooperation is much beyond the just the weapons deal, and it's much more about its strategies and tactics against those forces.
Well, Dr. Yang, I think the concern is not just these immediate parties. You could see the U.S. being drawn in. You could see China being drawn in. And from that, other medium powers as well. That is the fear in terms of a global security threat, surely.
Yeah, the thing is that even the European, they can provide the enough, security to their, NATO countries, and that's why the U.S. Still supporting the NATO countries, but it's not still enough. So that's where South Korea came in, and we didn't, go to the Poland to sell the weapons, and the Poland found us. So I mean, this kind of cooperation between these middle countries, maybe that's the way to deal with the future threat.
All right, that's one way to deal with it, Dr. Yang.
Singapore also.
The concern, of course, is whether the superpowers, what they might do as the medium-sized powers, reach out to each other. Thank you, Dr. Yang Wook, joining us live there from Seoul. Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to meet UN Secretary General António Guterres with Ukraine likely on the agenda. But even before the meeting, Mr. Putin has struck a defiant tone, saying any attempt to defeat his country on the battlefield would be an illusion. Now, Ukraine has strongly criticized the UN chief's decision to meet with the Russian president. The two men last saw each other in the first weeks of Moscow's siege of Mariupol in Ukraine. Mr. Guterres has since been involved in peace efforts between the two sides. He has also repeatedly criticized Moscow's military offensive against Ukraine, saying it sets, quote, a dangerous precedent for the world. China says foreign spies are trying to steal secrets from its space program as an extraterrestrial arms race intensifies. The State Security Ministry does not name any countries, but says these foreign intelligence agencies are using high-precision satellites to infiltrate and steal. The ministry said on its official WeChat account that China needs to safeguard space security for its future survival and development. Beijing wants to land a person on the moon by 2030. But this is happening at a time when the space around our planet is becoming more congested with abandoned satellites and rocket debris. Beijing says it's because of this hoard that the competition for space resources is heating up. At least 26 people have died in the Philippines after Tropical Storm Trami made landfall on the country's main island of Luzon this morning. Schools and government offices have been forced to shut for a second straight day. The death toll is expected to rise as many people remain missing. Rescuers are racing to reach residents who are still stranded by flooding in Bicol, the region southeast of Manila, which bore the brunt of the storm. Around 1,500 police officers have been deployed for disaster response efforts, while authorities are looking for ways to deliver food and water to those who are trapped and who are unable to be evacuated immediately. Parts of northern Luzon continue to experience torrential rain and strong winds, which has also left at least 9 regions without power. More than 2 million people have been affected by the storm, with some 30,000 forced to evacuate in Bicol ahead of the landfall of Trami, after floodwaters reached as high as the roofs of bungalow houses. Trami is still rippling through the Philippines, but is expected to exit the island within 12 hours. While storms and typhoons are common in the region during this time of the year, experts note that they are increasingly forming closer to coastlines, intensifying more rapidly and persisting longer over land due to climate change. And Cherry Regalado in Manila tells us what long-term measures the Philippines' Marcos government is implementing to mitigate the impact of climate change.
President Marcos assumed office in 2022. He promised to address the effects of climate change. He says that this is part of his priority agenda. Now, just last July, he announced that his administration will be completing around 5,000 flood control projects, and that he is allocating some 1 trillion pesos for climate change expenditures or green spending for next year, for 2025. Now, that's an 84% increase in the spending for green spending. Earlier this year, President Marcos also announced that his administration plans to join more international environmental events to solidify its commitment to global climate action.
And still ahead on East Asia tonight, the world's biggest contract chipmaker TSMC and China's Huawei are under scrutiny for potential violation of U.S. sanctions. And the Boeing Workers' Union rejects a new and improved offer from the plane maker, extending a crippling strike into its 6th week. You're watching East Asia tonight, and it's time for business news with Henry Yin. Now, Henry, a big response in the Hong Kong market to a big listing. But, you know, one swallow does not a summer make. Can we say that one overwhelming response means this drought is over?
That's a really good question. At least at the moment, we can see that the enthusiasm is has changed a lot. And so we are talking about, of course, the overwhelming response there in the Hong Kong market. The two listings drew tremendous investors' response, a welcome sign for the stock market overshadowed by uncertainties in the Chinese economy. While the Hong Kong market has been struggling for the past 3 years, weighed primarily by uncertainties in the Chinese economy. But that's changing. This week, Hong Kong saw its two largest initial public offerings so far this year garner overwhelming response from investors. Shares of Chinese self-driving tech company Horizon Robotics soared as much as 30% after it raised $700 million in its IPO. The firm's solid debut comes a day after shares of bottled water company China Resources Beverage jumped 15% yesterday. Both companies' shares were oversubscribed. Last month's listing by Chinese appliance maker Media Group raised $4.6 billion in what then was the city's largest IPO in 3 years. Hong Kong's exchange operator is upbeat about IPO activity in the territory as interest in equity markets rise. And new listings in Hong Kong raised a cumulative $7.1 billion in the 9 months to September the 30th, compared with $5.9 billion for the full year of 2023. Analysts say the Hong Kong market started showing signs of recovery after Beijing unveiled a stimulus package last month. And Hong Kong regulators have also recently announced measures to support market activity, including providing more certainty on timelines when vetting IPO applicants. And experts say last month's interest rate cut by the Federal Reserve has helped release cash into the market as the local currency is pegged to the greenback. And they also see low share valuations and increasing corporate dividends helping the market. Well, chip-making giant TSMC has reportedly stopped supplying advanced chips to one of its clients on concerns it may flout U.S. sanctions. That comes after TSMC discovered that some of its chips have ended up in Huawei products. It's a potential violation of U.S. sanctions intended to stop the flow of American tech to Chinese firms. The incident also suggests that China is still struggling to reliably make its own advanced chips in sufficient quantity. Huawei has been on the U.S. sanctions list since 2020. This means it's barred from doing business with TSMC and its chip-making peers without a U.S. government license. In the past year, Huawei has relied on local partner SMIC for production. TSMC said it has informed authorities in U.S. and Taiwan about the incident and continues to investigate. South Korea's economy barely grew in the third quarter as exports declined, offsetting a recovery in consumer spending. Advanced central bank estimates showed GDP expanded 1.5% on-year in the third quarter. That's weaker than the previous quarter's growth and falls below market expectations. It's also the slowest pace of growth since the third quarter of last year. That prompted the central bank to warn of a potential downgrade to its 2024 growth forecast, while the finance minister called for response measures to confront the slowdown. The Bank of Korea, which lowered its full-year estimate from 2.5% to 2.4% in August, said that it will likely be weaker than even that, as it has become, quote, difficult to achieve. Well, the bank next revises its quarterly economic forecast in November. Meantime, on quarter, the economy was able to rebound from a contraction in the second quarter, but the weak growth is a setback for Asia's fourth largest economy and could exert pressure on the one, which has weakened nearly 5% against the dollar this month. Well, South Korean chipmaker SK Hynix has posted record quarterly profit and revenue as it continues to ride high on the artificial intelligence boom. Well, the strong report card reflects steady demand for the NVIDIA supplier's advanced chips used in AI products. Operating profit came in at $5 billion, beating market estimates. Revenue climbed 94% on year, and though it slightly missed expectations, it's also a stark contrast from a year ago when it reported a loss of $3 billion. And SK hynix has outperformed rivals Samsung and Micron in recent quarters as it benefits the most from AI-driven appetite for high-end memory chips. And the firm plans to start mass-producing more of these products, which some analysts say could account for more than 30% of the company's total revenue. But headwinds remain. China's aggressive expansion of its chip production capacity has become an industry concern, which could threaten to derail the recovery of South Korea's memory chip market. And checking SK hynix shares and closing the day higher in today's trading session. And year to date, shares of the world's second biggest memory chip maker have gained almost 40%. Hyundai Motor recorded a fall in third quarter operating profit, hurt by warranty costs for its Santa Fe SUVs and as a global slowdown in car demand weighed. Hyundai Motor, which together with affiliate Kia Corp is the world's third biggest automaker by sales, reported operating profit of $2.6 billion for July to September period. And that's a 7% drop from the same period last year, and also fall behind market estimates. Revenue rose 4.7% to more than $31 billion for the period. While Hyundai Motor's global retail sales fell 5% in the third quarter from a year earlier, amid a tepid demand in Europe. Major European car makers, including Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz and BMW, have flagged a worsening outlook for auto demand as well as rising costs, wiping billions of dollars off the sector's market value. While Hyundai's sales of EVs fell. Sales of hybrid EVs jumped over 40% from a year earlier. And Hyundai has announced plans to double its hybrid vehicle lineup to counter a slowdown in global EV demand. It has slashed targets for EV sales and delayed the development and launch of some of EV models. Boeing factory workers have voted to reject the company's latest contract offer, and they have decided to extend a 6-week strike that has halted production of the aerospace giant's best-selling jetliners.
We will stand for the demands that our members need to get a contract that they can respect, that shows the respect that they deserve. There's much more work to do. We will push to get back to the table. We will push for the members' demands as quickly as we can, and we remain on strike.
Members of the Machinists Union voted 64% against a proposed contract that would have delivered a 35% wage increase over 4 years. A sticking point was the company's refusal to restore a traditional pension plan that was axed a decade ago. The decision came on the same day Boeing warned investors that it would burn through cash into 2025 after burning through more than $10 billion in the first 9 months of 2024. Analysts estimate that the walkout is costing Boeing around $1 billion a month. Without a deal, factories that built the 737, 767 and 777 jets remain idled, further sapping Boeing's revenue and risking more disruption in its supply chain. The crippling strike has pushed the plane maker to post a quarterly loss of $6 billion, prompting its CEO to lay out a comeback plan.
Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg laid out a stark turnaround plan on Wednesday, calling for a fundamental culture change at the struggling plane maker. This comes as the company reported losses of nearly $8 billion so far this year, due in part to a crippling West Coast machinist strike that has halted production of its best-selling 737 MAX, 777, and 767 planes. In a letter to employees, Ortberg stressed the need to, quote, prevent the festering of issues and work better together after critical lapses in its performance disappointed customers and eroded public trust. Added Ortberg, quote, this is a big ship that will take some time to turn, but when it does, it has the capacity to be great again. The plane maker's troubles stretch back to January, when a door panel flew off an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 MAX 9 jet in midair. Last month, the company announced sweeping plans to downsize by cutting 17,000 jobs, or 10% of its global workforce, and delaying the first delivery of its 777X jet by 1 year. It also laid out plans for a capital raise, which Reuters has reported could be around $15 billion. Ortberg on Wednesday told CNBC that Boeing is now reviewing its businesses and may end up selling some assets.
And that's all for business. Back to you, Wesu.
Thanks, Henry. So on East Asia tonight, a look at how Chinese car makers are powering up Indonesia's dream of becoming a dominant force in the global EV market. The presidents of South Korea and Poland condemned the growing military cooperation between North Korea and Russia after Yoon Suk-yeol and Andrzej Duda meet in Seoul. Vladimir Putin is set to meet UN Chief António Guterres for the first in-person talks in over 2 years, amid calls at the BRICS summit for an end to the war in Ukraine. At least 26 people have died in the Philippines after Tropical Storm Trami made landfall on the country's main island of Luzon. Southeast Asia's largest economy, Indonesia, wants to be a key player in the global electric vehicle market. The country has the world's biggest nickel reserves, a metal that is crucial in the making of batteries in electric vehicles. Chani Vavani reports on how Chinese car makers are plugging into Indonesia's EV ambitions.
Gunawan is in the market for his next car. His family already have one electric car. They're thinking about getting another one.
Pengalaman anak saya sih dia bilang gampang ya, tinggal kan rutin 6 bulan sekali mampir ke bengkel, cek, dan biayanya pasti jauh lebih murah daripada mobil konvensional gitu.
Data from the Association of Indonesian Automotive Industries shows that sales of electric cars have surged by 177% year-on-year from January to August and contribute over 4% to total national car sales. Chinese car maker Wuling inaugurated its factory in West Java in 2017. Its products that are sold in Indonesia and some exported overseas are manufactured here, including its EVs.
This Wuling factory can produce 120 electric vehicles per day. The cars go through a series of rigorous tests before they're deemed suitable for the market.
And Wuling is planning an expansion.
Untuk kedepannya, ya kami tentunya ingin mengekspan lagi, di mana bentuknya adalah kami ingin membangun fasilitas baterai mobil listrik di sana. Dan kita sudah menjadwalkan atau mengagendakan produksi baterai mobil listrik itu akan dimulai di akhir tahun 2024.
Indonesia has been actively courting the EV market. The incentives include a removal of the luxury tax on EVs for 2024, the waiver of import tax until 2025, and a reduction in value-added tax on the sale of EVs, provided the electric vehicle incorporates 40% locally made components.
Kalau saat ini mobil EV itu kondisinya saya pikir sebuah teknologi yang baru ya buat di Indonesia, dan juga yang menarik adalah adanya subsidi pemerintah terhadap pajak mobil EV, dan juga sehingga menambah nilai ekonomis bagi pengguna mobil EV tersebut.
Chinese EV manufacturer BYD is expected to begin factory operations in January 2026. The car maker is investing $1.3 billion to build an EV plant and is expected to bring added value to Indonesia's EV ecosystem by contributing to the industry, economy, and jobs. While the ecosystem is still in its infancy, there are concerns for the future.
The government itu punya good initiative dalam mendukung transisi energi ke yang lebih baik. Namun seperti kita tahu, Indonesia juga menghadapi pergantian pemerintahan ke depan. Tentunya yang paling kita harapkan adalah dan menjadi target kita adalah EV policy ini pun semakin konsisten atau bahkan semakin baik.
Authorities have set a production target of 600,000 EV units by 2030. According to government data, China has invested $3.9 billion throughout the first half of 2024. It is also Indonesia's second largest source of foreign direct investment over the same period. Recently, Beijing pledged to ramp up its investment in Indonesia's EV industry after a bilateral meeting between both countries' top diplomats, helping Jakarta to chase its EV dream.
And for more, CNA's Indonesia correspondent Chani Bhavani joins us on the set. Thanks for coming in and joining us this evening, Chani. Now, we just heard that concerns over change of government and therefore maybe policy not staying consistent on electric vehicles. So Indonesia has a production target of 600,000 EV units by 2030, but with even these obvious challenges or concerns being voiced, can it be reached? What would stop it reaching that goal?
Well, Wesu, there are a couple of factors to this entire EV situation as it stands. We know authorities are looking into ramping up EVs, as you mentioned, 600,000 by 2030, but also 400,000 by 2025. And now, in the course of doing this particular story that we all just saw, I've had many, many conversations with Indonesians and various people on the ground. And so essentially there are two parties that I've essentially talked to. Now, one of them, as I said, your everyday Indonesians, but then the other automakers. Now, when I've spoken to the first half, that's, the many Indonesians, a lot of them have expressed a number of concerns, starting off with, of course, EVs compared to what they're used to, which is your regular motorized vehicles. Just how do they actually operate it? So in terms of battery, in terms of servicing, they have all of these questions and they're actually concerned like, oh, what if my battery dies? Where do I go for servicing? Is it going to cost me a lot of money? Sure, in terms of affordability, of course, prices are quite affordable for your everyday person. But then they are quite concerned with regards to sort of, again, what if my battery stops working? What if it gets spoiled? And then there's also another challenge. Given the fact that it is Indonesia, every year we have the homecoming during the Eid holidays, where everybody who's working in Indonesia or sort of in Jakarta or working in Jakarta, rather, they travel back to their hometowns. Now, a large portion of people travel using road. They travel by road. They go home by road, whether it's using their cars or their motorcycles. And so then that brings up another challenge. If they're using electric vehicles, whether cars or motorcycles, halfway, where are they going to charge it? As it stands at the moment in the current landscape, there are a lot more charging stations in Java, versus nationwide. And oftentimes these journeys back to their hometowns, it's days long. It could be 24 hours, it could be 48 hours, it could be even 72 hours.
So practical concerns.
Absolutely. And then you have the other half that I've talked to, which are the automakers. And then for them, of course, as you rightly pointed out, earlier, consistency when it comes to government regulation. They are concerned, we've just had, we have a new government now, so there definitely are some concerns about, or rather they're hopeful and they're optimistic that there should be some consistency when it comes to EVs. They believe that government leads, and so if the government is maintaining a consistent policy where EVs are concerned, then there is a higher chance of sort of EVs becoming commonplace. And then there's the other sort of concern expressed by automakers that not enough is being done in terms of spreading awareness to your everyday people about those everyday things, the batteries and the servicing. They believe that if there was more awareness being spread, then people wouldn't fear sort of swapping out their motorized vehicles for EVs. Because again, depending on the automaker, there are things like lifetime warranty. There are things like free battery exchange if there was something wrong with your battery. So these are all of the issues that, I've encountered when, or people have told me about when I've talked to them on the ground. And again, authorities are targeting some 10,000 charging stations by 2025. We have some 2,500 stations now. And so if all of these factors come together, then it might be achievable.
If they can address all these concerns, in principle, a thriving EV market, if they can meet that target they've set themselves, then not just you've got high quality growth, you've got jobs, you've got likely attracting FDI, and also that big thing everyone is concerned about, green transition to address the problems of climate change. In Indonesia, if one can so-called address climate change, what would that mean in terms of, say, the capital, Jakarta?
Well, if we look at Jakarta right now, as it stands, right, of course, pollution is something Jakarta is notorious for, but it's also notorious for traffic, right? And these are issues that Jakarta has grappled with for decades and decades. And of course, there has been no solution up until this point, no actionable or, seeable reduction, so to speak. And so, again, if successful, there poses the question, will this actually succeed in reducing all of these elements? Now, as recently as February, we've even had a member of parliament come forward and say, well, actually, looking at data, there hasn't been any significant reduction in terms of air pollution with regards to that contributed by motorized vehicles, given the fact that there is an increase in the use of electric cars or EVs, electric motorcycles as well. And so this then begs the question, how much of a volume in terms of people adopting EVs, what's
that's in Jakarta.
This is just in Jakarta alone. So how much, what percentage of people actually need to swap out their motorized vehicles for EVs in order for Jakarta to see a significant reduction? So there's that factor to be considered. And then there's also another factor, which is the fact that where pollution is concerned, okay, you have motorized vehicles, but it's not just attributed to motorized vehicles. You have, of course, coal-fired power plants, and then you have factories and so on and so forth. So there really needs to be a concerted effort. But then there's also the other fact that if they do swap out, say, their motorized vehicles for EVs, it doesn't mean they're cutting down on the other problem, which is traffic. You're just essentially swapping one for the other, because the vehicle is still going to stay on the road. So that's something authorities certainly also need to weigh and consider.
All right, changing tack very slightly, Chani, because looking at your package, the Chinese investment into what it sees as a very promising industry, and we saw Indonesia's new foreign minister attending, he's at the BRICS summit as well, in our headlines yesterday. So not concerns, but I suppose interest, a curiosity whether under Mr. Prabowo Subianto, who both in temperament and in background is very different from Mr. Joko Widodo, are we looking at possibly a more proactive, more muscular foreign policy? Final question.
You're absolutely right, Wei Su. We did see prior to the government change there, Indonesia, China attended a bilateral meeting where both parties agreed to ramp up investment in the EV industry. So certainly, we can expect to see more being done on that aspect. Now, with regards to foreign policy and China and President Prabowo, I want to take you back to his inauguration speech, his first speech as president of Indonesia during his inauguration last Sunday, actually. And he reiterated something that he has said before. And he said that when it comes to foreign policy, Indonesia, firstly, has traditionally adopted a non-bloc, non-aligned policy. And in his speech, he sort of reiterated the same and said that, Indonesia would like to be the good neighbor. And that's the sort of policy that they would adopt, where he, again, reiterated or sort of said something he said a couple of times before, that for Indonesia, 1,000 friends are too few and just one enemy is too many. And so, as you mentioned as well, it comes as no surprise that Indonesia, there are reports of Indonesia sort of being a BRIC partner country. And so in terms of the economy also, I want to bring up the fact that where President Prabowo is concerned, there are aspirations for Indonesia sort of achieving an 8% growth. And where that is concerned, of course, trade and investments play a key role. And so given, this all of these aspects, it wouldn't come as a surprise to see President Prabowo strengthening engagement or efforts in trade and investment with various countries, China included.
The overarching goal of becoming a developed nation by 2045. Thanks so much for coming in and covering all these topics for us, Chani Babani, our Indonesian correspondent. Still on East Asia tonight, with the U.S. presidential election just around the corner, what can the Indo-Pacific region expect from Harris or Trump, or from a Harris or Trump administration? More on today's CNA Plus segment. And the woman at the center of a rape trial in France that has shocked the world has addressed the court, denouncing what she described as immeasurable betrayal by her now former husband. More than 50 men are accused of raping Gisèle Pellico while she was unconscious after having been repeatedly drugged by her ex-husband in abuse that lasted for a decade. Ross Cullen reports.
Gisèle Pellico was defiant on Wednesday as she took the stand to give testimony in a trial that has sent shockwaves around this country. She told the court that my life has collapsed into nothingness, and she formally asked her ex-husband, how could you betray me to this extent, bring these strangers into our bedroom? Dominique Pellico kept his eyes down and did not look at his ex-wife while she was addressing the court. She said she was determined that this case should bring about changes in French society. Ms. Pellico could have requested that this trial stay behind closed doors, the explicit details and video evidence out of the public eye. But instead, she says it's not her shame to bear, but her rapists. It's a sentiment that has resonated at the regular protests taking place across France this autumn in support of Ms. Pellico and all victims of sexual assault. The idea that shame has changed sides and calls from activists for the focus in rape cases to be taken off the woman who suffered the abuse and instead placed on the man who committed the attacks. Campaigners are also demanding that France's law on rape be changed to include consent, something lawmakers are mulling over. The trial is expected to conclude on the 20th of December. Ross Cullen, CNA, Paris.
The US presidential election, now just less than 2 weeks away, will have consequences beyond the North American continent. The Indo-Pacific hosts more American troops than any other region outside of the United States. And America's next commander-in-chief will decide how these forces engage. This week, CNA's documentary series Insight takes a look at what that could look like under Donald Trump or Kamala Harris.
Launched in February 2022, President Biden's Indo-Pacific strategy has 5 objectives. Advance a free and open Indo-Pacific. Build connections within and beyond the region. Drive regional prosperity. Bolster Indo-Pacific security and build regional resilience to transnational threats.
China has become challenged to what we might refer to as American hegemony, for instance, which has been recognized as such ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, right, back in 1990. So in that context, the United States needed to respond to a perceived increase in terms of China's influence and ability to shape relationships within the Asia-Pacific region.
The U.S. does not want China to expand its powers into the Pacific. And so South China Sea has become a theater for conflict between these two elephants.
The Indo-Pacific strategy echoes a similar move made by President Obama. The East Asia strategy, also known as the pivot to Asia. Biden had served as Obama's vice president.
It started with President Obama, carried out by Secretary Hillary Clinton, 2012. So they were pivoting back to Asia. Then President Biden, when he became president, merely continued this Indo-Pacific plan. Under that Indo-Pacific plan, the U.S. says they want to fly, sail, and navigate in the international waters, including the South China Sea. But the bottom line really is the U.S. does not want the Chinese Navy to venture into the Pacific Ocean openly.
Outside of the Philippines, President Biden also revitalized other regional partnerships. One of those is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad. It is a group of 4 made up of Australia, India, Japan, and the USA. The Quad was first formed in 2007, but dissolved in 2008, following Australia's departure. It was revived in 2017 under President Trump and further advanced under President Biden.
at its core, the Quad is actually like a 600-pound gorilla because of the immense geopolitical weight that Australia, Japan, India, and the United States brings to the table. Two of them are nuclear armed with nuclear weapons, and they're advanced economies, and they can bring power to bear whenever there's an altercation in the region. Therein lies the power of the Quad.
The Quad is key to President Biden's strategy. In the document outlining the Indo-Pacific strategy, the Quad was mentioned 13 times. Biden met his counterparts virtually in March 2021 for the first Quad Leaders Summit. They have met 5 other times since then.
And it's not just between the 4 members of the Quad, they are also bringing in other powers that are coming from outside the Indo-Pacific. So, for example, the United Kingdom is now supposed to be in a series of exercises that are being conducted by the US and Japan. So the Quad is becoming this omnibus kind of coalition where, you know, they welcome any power that's interested in building what they call a so-called rules-based international order.
Members of the Quad have also participated in joint exercises in the South China Sea. In September, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand joined the US and the Philippines on patrols of the South China Sea. The increased US presence in its backyard has drawn the ire of China.
关于美菲的军事合作，中方也多次表明立场。美国不是南海问题的当事方，无权介入中非两国之间的涉海问题。
China's position on the Quad has been very steady and consistent, that it thinks that it's destabilizing, of course, because it challenges China. In fact, to any kind of minilateral that smacks of any intention of actually managing the rise of China or challenging China, China views it very negatively.
On November 5th, the US will elect a new commander-in-chief. In the running is current Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. How will American alliances in the Indo-Pacific change with the new occupant in the White House?
Full episode of Insight tonight on CNA, or catch up with video on demand and CNA Insider's YouTube page. And that's East Asia Tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook, YouTube, and X.